For thousands of years, we've talked about it. The ghost in the machine, the little voice inside your head. It's the ultimate mystery. But what happens when that mystery stops being just a philosophical debate and, well, ends up in a Petri dish? So let's just get right to it. This is maybe the central question of our existence, right? What is this subjective experience that you and I are having right this very second? Yeah, for the longest time, this question wasn't really for scientists. It was a job for philosophers. They're the ones who wrestled with this deep, deep puzzle of how our inner world, our thoughts, our feelings, how does that connect to our physical bodies? But all of that has changed. And I mean, it has changed dramatically. That abstract debate, it's now a real, tangible, biological experiment. What you're looking at, these are tiny, lab-grown brain organoids. Okay, so to really get what's happening in these labs, we've got to take a step back and understand the philosophical problem they're actually trying to solve. All right, so a lot of neuroscientists today, they kind of work within this framework called non-reductive physicalism. Sounds complicated, but the core idea is pretty straightforward. It says, look, the mind absolutely 100% depends on the physical brain, but, and this is the important part, you can't just boil down the experience of seeing the color red to just a bunch of neurons firing. They're connected, for sure, but they aren't the exact same thing. Let's break that down a little more. You've got two camps, right? On one side, there's reductive physicalism. They say the mind is the brain. A thought is nothing more than neurons firing. End of story. But the non-reductive view says, hold on, a thought is realized by those neurons. It's a super subtle difference in wording, but it's an absolutely crucial one. The best analogy here is software and hardware. Think of your mind as the software. It can't run without the hardware, right? The brain? But you'd never describe your experience of scrolling through an app by just listing off all the ones and zeros in the code. That would be crazy. You need a different language, a higher level of description to talk about the experience itself. So, okay, if the mind isn't just the sum of its brainy parts, how in the world could we ever measure its most essential quality, consciousness itself? Well, that's the big scientific frontier we're diving into right now. And that brings us to something called integrated information theory, or IIT for short. Now, this is one of the biggest and frankly most controversial scientific theories of consciousness out there. And it makes this really wild claim. Consciousness isn't just for brains. It could be a fundamental property of any system that has the right kind of complex integrated structure. And get this, IIT says we can actually put a number on it. They call the measure of consciousness phi. The more integrated information a system has, the higher its phi, and the more conscious it is. So a rock, phi of 0. Your brain, listening to this right now, it would have a massive phi value. So where does this theory even come from? Well, it's pretty clever. It starts with what we already know for sure, our own experience. It lays out these 5 basic truths, or axioms, like integration, the fact that your experience feels like one whole thing. You don't see the left side of the room and the right side of the room as 2 separate experiences, right? It's all one unified whole. So IIT takes these truths about experience and works backward, asking, okay, what kind of physical system could possibly create that? It literally starts with the feeling and then goes looking for the physics. But, as you can probably guess, trying to put a number on consciousness, well, it has kicked up a massive storm of controversy. Is this the breakthrough we've been waiting for? Or is it just a scientific dead end? And I mean, the scientific community is completely split on this. On one side, you have huge supporters like the neuroscientist Christoph Koch, who calls it the only really promising theory we've got. It's even led to real clinical tools. But on the other side, whoa, you've got more than 100 scholars who signed an open letter calling it pseudoscience. They argue its claims can't be tested and that it leads to really weird conclusions, like the idea that even a simple gadget could have some tiny flicker of consciousness. And look, this is not just some nerdy academic fight. This debate is becoming seriously urgent, and it's because the theory is now becoming a reality in the lab. That's right, we're back here, in the lab. What was, for centuries, just a thought experiment, minds, matter, all that stuff, it is now a literal, physical experiment being done with living, human brain tissue. Right now, scientists are working with what they call brain surrogates in a few different ways. First, you've got these organoids, which are basically mini brains grown from stem cells. Then there's ex vivo tissue. These are tiny slices of brain tissue kept alive after being removed in a surgery.
And then there are chimeras, which is when human brain cells are actually transplanted into animal brains.
And you have to understand, this science is moving at lightning speed. I mean, what you're looking at here isn't just a basic organoid anymore, it's an S-symbloid. They're literally fusing different lab-grown brain regions together to see how they wire themselves up. The complexity is just exploding. And that, of course, leads us straight into a minefield of really, really urgent ethical questions. Questions we need to start asking, like yesterday. Okay, first and probably the biggest one. At what point does a blob of brain cells stop being just tissue? Could it ever develop the capacity to feel pain or to suffer? And if it did, how on earth would we even know? And then you get into these really strange questions about ownership. I mean, who owns a brain organoid? The person who donated the cells? The lab that created it? Is it even possible to own something that might have its own flicker of awareness?
And what about those chimeras? If you put human brain cells into a mouse and it becomes smarter, is it still just a mouse? Does it suddenly deserve special treatment, special rights? Where do you draw the line?
You know, a group of scientists writing in the journal Nature put it perfectly. They said the very thing that makes these little brains so useful for science, the fact that they're getting closer and closer to a real human brain, is the exact same thing that makes them so ethically terrifying.
So that leaves us with this final, massive thought. Our quest to understand consciousness has brought us to a place where we can actually start to build the thing that creates it. And as we head down that road, the biggest question isn't just what is a brain anymore. It's what part of being human do we need to protect?